Thank you for joining me on a quilting tale today. My name is Shaylin, and in today's video, I'm going to show you how to make the star blocks in a quilt pattern called Stars and Stripes Forever by Fig Tree & Company. It's a large throw size quilt that finishes at 58 by 71 inches, and I'm making a kit with the Catalina fabric line that I've had for quite some time. Now, if you haven't seen the first video I made showing you how to make the flag blocks, you might want to check that one out. I will link it in the description and at the end of this video, but I made the flags for that one, and now I'm on to the star blocks, which consists of 5 different styles of stars. Now you have the option, and there is enough fabric if you have the kit, or if you want to make your own, you can mix and match the stars. They're all the same size, but essentially we are grouping stars into strips of 4, and then you'll need 15 of those star strip sets total. So the stars that I'll be demonstrating how to make today are number 1, the Twinkle star, number 2, the 4-patch star, number 3 is the Sawtooth star, number 4 is the Box star, and 5 is the Pinwheel star. So I'll take you through the process of making those and the setting for all of them, which is the same for all 5 varieties of stars. And in another video, I will show you how I put all these blocks together, including the sashing to complete the top. I will say at the time of filming this, I have finished the top and it is at the long armor. So hopefully I'll have it back in time. It might not be bound, but hopefully I'll have it back to at least show when I put the top together with it all quilted. I'm really excited to get it back. But whether I have it for the next video or not, I'll be sure to show it when it's finished. This is a great pattern to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the United States, or you just want a patriotic quilt. I have enjoyed putting this pattern together. So before I get started with showing you how to put the stars together, I thought, just in case someone is curious, the blocks behind me are the blocks I've made for the Homespun Quilt Collective Block of the Month that, lo and behold, Stitchery is currently putting on. And these are my blocks for months 1 through 3. It's an 8-month program, and I'm currently working on month 4. They're almost done, so probably in my next video I'll show an update. I've been kind of sharing the progress at the end of my last few videos as I complete each month. But I thought I'd just get them up on the design wall and see how it's looking. This is going to be a massive quilt. I can't fit all the rows of stars on here, so I just kind of have everything scrunched together. It's not proportional to how it'll be, but I just wanted to see how the blocks were looking together. So this has been a fun block of the month to be a part of, and I will continue sharing the progress on that. So with all that being said, let's get started. I will show you how to put together the 5 styles of stars for the Stars and Stripes Forever quilt. I've got all my pieces cut out to make my star units, and as you can see, I have a few pieces that are outside of the bags. These are going to be used in every type of star and the units that I'll be making, putting them together, whereas the ones in the bags are specific to the 5 types of stars. So I have them labeled by star number 1, Twinkle star, the 4-patch star, then we have Sawtooth star is number 3, the Box star is number 4, and Pinwheel star is number 5. So everything is ready to go to make for quick assembly. All of these stars have the same basic layout. It's really the centers that are different, but we'll be making flying geese and diamond in a square units to be kind of the border of the stars, and then the centers will be what's different, with the exception of the Pinwheel star. This one is just a little more complicated because the points of the star are made up of 2 fabrics, whereas all the others are just made of 1. So it'll be just a little trickier because you'll have to be careful with the placement, but still very doable. And so that's what I'm going to show you how to do next. We're going to make star number 1, the Twinkle star. So these first few pieces I'm going to demonstrate will be the same no matter which star I make, with the exception of the number 5 star, which has 2 different fabrics. But to make the star rows that go around the centers, I'm going to need an L rectangle and 2 of my blue pieces. In this case, I'm going to use the O gingham prints, and I'm going to use the sew and flip method to make flying geese. And there's a few ways you can do that. You can draw a line from corner to corner and stitch on it. You can fold it in half and press to make your stitch line. You can also use diagonal seam tape on your sewing machine to help you line up your corners and sew. So whichever way you'd like. And as I mentioned in the first video I did on this quilt, this pattern suggests not trimming the bottom layers when you sew and flip. Normally you would trim leaving a 1/4 inch away from your seam, but the pattern suggests leaving it on if the bottom fabric is lighter, because it will give the shape a little more structure and hold it. And I found that it worked just fine in the first part of the quilt making the flags, and so I just figured I'd keep doing it. So I'm going to sew and flip this piece, and then I'll take the second one and do the same thing, where I'll sew and flip, press it down, and I need to make 30 of them. And like I said, no matter which star I'm making, I'll need 30 of these flying geese. So I'm going to take care of that now. As you can see, I've been using chain piecing to attach my squares to the rectangles. That way I can do all 30 pieces at once. And so I'm using the diagonal seam tape method just because I have so many diagonal seams to sew. And to do this, I just line up one corner of my square right at the needle, and then the opposite corner I want to make sure is lined up on the red line here right in the center. And I don't pin pieces this small, but you certainly could pin if you wanted to. And I'm going to just sew and make sure that this corner stays on the red line, and I'll just keep adding pieces to continue the chain piecing. I finished pressing my 30 flying geese, and as you can see, I did not trim away the bottom 2 layers. I can still see that stitch line, so when I sew a 1/4 inch away, I'm going to be aiming to hit that intersection point or just a tad bit above, but keeping the layers intact there, I can still see the original rectangle and just make sure that they are the right size. And so the next step, the second piece that's the same for all the stars, is going to be making the diamond in a square unit. So I'll need 9K pieces and my remaining blue square. So with these, I'll take a square and I will sew and flip a blue piece on opposite corners. So sew both of these. Then I'll flip and press them, and then I will do the opposite sides, because that way they'll overlap those pieces that are already sewn down. So I'm going to do 9 of these, and that will complete the border pieces that will go around the center of the stars. So I finished my diamond and the square units. They're all pressed, and like I said, I'm going to keep the bottom 2 layers intact rather than trim a 1/4 inch away from the seams like I normally would. And I'll also, before I finish up here, just trim around the white square here just to make sure that they are all squared up. And then I will show you how to use these pieces and the flying geese units to make the border. Now that my flying geese and diamond in a square units are made, I'm going to make the border for these star units, and they will all consist of these pieces here, the M squares, the L rectangles, and then the diamond in a square and flying geese with the coordinating blue fabric. So in this case, it's going to be the blue gingham for our twinkle stars. So you'll use these 4 different pieces to make this border. It'll start with a square and then alternate between flying geese and rectangle, flying geese, rectangle, so that you have 4 stars. You'll put some flying geese on the side to close up the stars, and then repeat row 1 on row 3 here. So the only difference is going to be the centers. There are 5 different centers, and that's what makes the 5 different units. So for the first one, I'm going to be doing the twinkle star center. And as I mentioned, they're all going to be built the same way. The only difference is the 5th star, the pinwheel. The flying geese and diamond in a square will have 2 different blue fabrics. And so you just have to be a little more careful with the placement of those. But other than that, this is going to be the layout, and you'll sew the rows together. So first I need to make the centers for my twinkle stars, which are really going to be hourglass blocks. And then I can sew these rows together. For every type of star, I'm going to make 3 of these star units. So that's why I have these extra pieces here. And that is following the pattern in the book. I'm going to do the same layout that they have on the cover. You can, of course, swap them out and change them if you want more of one type of star or just one type. It's up to you. You just would have to cut the right amount of coordinating fabric. But I figured I'd just keep it as close to the cover as possible so I know I have the right amount of fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and show you now how to make block number 1 centers, the twinkle star. The hourglass block is made up of 4 pieces total, 2 end triangles and 2 P triangles. These came from squares originally that were cut in half along the diagonal. And so this is the layout that we'll be using. So you'll start by sewing 2 pieces together so that the right angles or the square corners are aligned. And then the hypotenuse, those long edges opposite the right angle, are going to be on the outside. And since this is where the square was cut diagonally, keep in mind that this is a bias edge. It's going to be stretchier, so you're going to want to handle it gently as you sew. But we're going to just put one piece over the other, and then we're going to sew a 1/4 inch down. You'll make 24 sets of these, and I'm going to press toward the dark side. And that way, I'll be able to just flip around like this, and they'll be able to nest so that the blues are opposite each other and the whites are opposite each other. And then we'll sew a seam along this side. And so that will give us a total of 12 hourglass blocks, which will be the centers of that star unit I was showing you. So I'm going to go ahead and sew those now. I thought I'd show how I trim these hourglass blocks down to size. First, let me show you the back. I did press the final seam open just to reduce some of the bulk, and I was careful every time I pressed, whether I was pressing to the dark side, putting the pairs of triangles together, or pressing the hourglass block open. I was careful not to move the iron back and forth so I don't distort these bias edges that are now the edges of my hourglass block. So to trim these down to size, I'm going to find the halfway point of the size I want. So I want to trim these down to 2.5 inches. And the halfway point for that would be 1.25 inch. And so I'm going to be using this diagonal line here and the intersection point where all 4 points of the triangle meet. I'm also going to take my ruler and use the black diagonal line, which will line up on the diagonal line of my hourglass block. And since the halfway point that I want is 1.25 inches, I'm going to go over 1.25 and down 1.25. So I'm going to want that dot that's right above my fingernail there.
So I'm going to place that dot right on the intersection point of the 4 triangles. And I'm going to line that black line up so that it's on top of the seam of the hourglass block. And the more accurate I can get that line, the better my ends are going to look. They're going to be just where they need to be. So once I have that lined up, I also want to double check that the fabric under the ruler is extending beyond 2.5 inches on both sides. And then I have some sticking out past the ruler. So these are oversized blocks, which is nice. There's lots of wiggle room to trim it down to size. So I'll go ahead and make my first 2 cuts. And then you could rotate your mat, or I just rotate the block. And so now that I have one side trimmed, I can actually line up the 2.5 inch mark on my ruler to those 2 trimmed edges and make sure that black line is still aligned with this new seam. And I should still have that 1.25 inch dot right in the intersection if I measured correctly. And so when I trim again on both sides, I end up with this nice hourglass block, and my fabric intersects right on the edges there, so that's how I want it to look. And so I'm just going to finish doing that. I've already started a bunch of them with my remaining blocks. And then I can add these to the center of those star sets that I was showing you earlier. So this is what the Twinkle stars are going to look like, 4 of them in one unit that's going to attach below a flag. And we're going to make sure that the hourglass pieces that are blue are on the top and bottom, and the white pieces are side to side. I'm going to sew row 1, row 2, and row 3 together. And so I think what I'll do, because all 3 of these units will be identical with the pieces that I have remaining, I'm going to just stack piles of 3 of each piece so I can do some chain piecing. But when I sew, I'll start with these pieces here, the first and second piece of the row. And I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch down. And on this piece, I will flip it so that the flying goose is on top, because there are those threads that intersect, and I want to make sure that I stitch just to the right of that intersection point, like just a stitch or so to the right of it, so that way when it gets pressed open, that point will be intact. On this side, there's no intersection points to worry about, so I will flip those just to make sure I don't miss that. Now, as far as pressing, because there are pieces above and below the middle that I want to nest with the middle row, I am going to be deliberate about pressing. I think what I'll do is press the top row toward the white pieces just to reduce some bulk. So I'll press away from the flying geese, which means I'm going to press toward the hourglass blocks. And that should help everything nest when I put the 3 rows together. So that's the plan. I'm going to do that now, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's all sewn together. All right, if I did this correctly and have my stacks of 3 of each, I should have no more pieces left that have the blue fabric in them. So all my hourglass blocks, diamond in a square, and flying geese have been used. I still have lots of L and M squares because I cut enough to help me make all my star units for all 5 of the types of stars. So when I come back, I'll show you what this looks like all put together. My Twinkle star units are done and they turned out just beautifully. I will show you the back and how I ended up pressing. I pressed away from the center, and then you can see how I pressed the hourglass blocks open. I will say that this is very thick. It was hard to press it flat because it was so thick. I ended up using my big iron. Usually I just use my small little project iron, but I use the clappers and the large iron on this to try and get it as flat as possible. So I might rethink cutting off the bottom 2 layers when I do the flying geese units. Um, some I know have more seams than others, but I do like that it kept the right size. Like these pieces all just locked together and nested so well. So that is nice because keeping the layers does keep that rectangular shape. So I'm still gonna debate. I might try this next one, cutting the bottom layers of the flying geese and see if I like that better. But I've got 3 of these. So the next one's going to be a simple 4 patch. So instead of the hourglass block in the middle, it'll just be 4 squares. I went ahead and made the flying geese for my 4 patch stars, and this time I cut the bottom 2 layers away just to reduce some bulk and see if that feels different. And I'll determine after this if I want to keep cutting them away or stick to leaving them on like I did with the twinkle stars. And then of course I have the M squares and L rectangles that I cut in the beginning. And so the only other pieces that are needed for this are these white S squares. They'll be in both sets here. And then I have my R pieces in one blue fabric and my Q pieces in another blue fabric, and those match the blue that are in my flying geese. So I'm going to make 6 of each. So I have piles of 6 so that I can just chain piece. And they're real simple to put together. Just going to sew 2 pieces together for the top row, sew 2 pieces together for the bottom row. And then I will press toward the blue fabric so that they can nest when I put the 2 rows together. And I'll do the same thing for this set. So these should come together really quickly, and then I can build that star border around just like I did in the last demonstration. My 4 patch centers are finished, so they just look like this or like this, and then they're just set into the same layout. I think I forgot to mention having to make these diamond in a square units too, but I have all those ready, so I'm just going to stack them in piles of 3 so I can do some chain piecing and put these together. I wanted to share a tip for aligning the seams of a 4 patch unit with the points of flying geese, or as I'm about to demonstrate, the diamond in a square unit. And so couple things. I always put the piece that has the intersecting points on top if there's a choice. That way I can see if my stitch line is going to hit right at the intersection or I need to make an adjustment. So I preserve those tips of the white diamond in there. And then the other suggestion would be to use lots of pins. So when I'm trying to align things, you could eyeball it, but to be more accurate, I just poke a pin right through that intersection point of the stitch lines. And if you look at the other side, it should be right at the tip. You should see the pin coming out, and you can adjust it if you need to, but it should be coming out right at the tip of that white diamond. So that looks good. And then I'm going to just eyeball it at first, about a 1/4 inch from the edge of my 4 patch. I'm going to poke the pin
through the seam. And then I can align, and if I need to move it up higher or lower to make my edges flush, then I can do that. But this looks good. So I'm going to also put a pin at the beginning and end just to hold these edges together, and that'll keep this center point that I've connected from moving around too much. So then when I go to sew my 1/4 inch down, I'm going to keep this pin. I usually just hold it up vertically with one hand as it's going through the sewing machine. And as I get closer, I'll pull it out and just have a firm hold on it as it goes under, just trying to prevent it from shifting around. But again, that's what these pins also help with. And then that usually gives me a nice aligned point with the seam of the 4 patch. So I'm going to do that as I attach. As you can see, I have just a seam going all the way across this horizontal seam. And then when I attach the rows after they're sewn together, I'll have the vertical seams of the 4 patch to also align to the tops of the stars and the bottoms. So that's what I'll be doing as I put these together. Just wanted to share that tip real quick. Here are my finished 4 patch stars. They turned out really cute. I still need to square them up and everything, but they look really good. I like the 2 different blue fabrics in the middle just for a little more interest. And using all those pins to line up the points worked well. They came together nicely. I will say that some of my flying geese were a little wonkier without the foundational piece it suggested keeping in, but I'm making so many of them and none of them were that drastically off, so I'm fine with how it's turning out here. One of the nice things about this dark contrast with the dark blue and white fabric is both pieces, whether it was the flying geese on top or the diamond in a square on top, both had those intersecting points that I wanted to see, but I could see that dark blue fabric underneath and see that point I was trying to hit, which was helpful. So as much as I can, I like to get the intersecting points on top, but if you can't, because they're on both sides, then yeah, looking for that dark fabric to show through is another helpful tip. So the next star unit is going to be the easiest one. That's the sawtooth star. And so I'm just going to make the same border pieces I've been doing, and the center is just a square of fabric. So this one will be a real quick one to put together. Very simple to lay these out. So I just have my squares in the center here and my stacks of 3. I'm going to go ahead and start assembling the sawtooth star units. Here are the simple and sweet star tooth saw blocks, all in the star units. Again, there's 3 of them. I ended up cutting the bottom layers. I think I'm just going to keep doing that from the flying geese and the diamond in a square units. Pressed the rows to the outside edges. And so these turned out really nice and came together quickly. So next is the 4th star, and that's going to be the box star, which is really just a diamond in a square center. So I'll show you how to put that together next. So for this one, I'm just going to need my W squares and my V squares, and I'll be making 12 of these, just like all the others, 12 centers. And really, these are just the same as the setting pieces that I've been making for all these star strips. So I'm going to make 21 of these, as I also just chain piece my flying geese. I still need 30 of these,
And so instead of the 9 diamond in a square setting pieces, I'm going to make 21, and that'll take care of my centers at the same time.
I've finished the first set of chain piecing, and to get the most out of it as possible, I just added one of my squares to my corner of my diamond in a square units, and I did all 21 of those. And then eventually I started adding my rectangles with my flying geese units, and I added those squares to the corner. And when I got to the end of all those rectangles, I cut off the diamond in a square pieces from the front of the line, and I started attaching the second piece. So I cut them all apart and attached the second piece. So really it just stayed one big chain. And so I have lots to cut apart now. I have my blade saver thread cutter here, but because there are 4 squares to put on it, I just thought this would help me with pressing, because I can press both of these at the same time and trim the bottom layers off. So I'm just going to get this pile cut apart, pressed and trimmed, and then I'll add the remaining squares to complete my flying geese and diamond in a square units, and I'll be able to put them all together in my box star strip sets. Here's the same setting that I've been using for all these star strips. And now I'm going to take these same pieces that have been part of the setting, but now they're going to become the star centers as well. So they just fall into place. And it'll look like this. So I'm going to make my piles of 3 of all these pieces and get these sewn together, but this is the box star. Here are my finished box star strip units, and this one again was one where it was important to line up the points on all the sides as you're attaching them to the diamond in a square and the flying geese unit. So just using that method where you poke a pin through to line them up really helped. So I have those 3 ready to go. And for my final star, it's going to be the pinwheel stars. And I'm actually going to start by building the centers. I'm going to take these squares that were cut diagonally in half. They're my Y pieces, so 2 different colors. And I'm going to use them to make half square triangles. And the reason I'm starting with these first is because we'll be matching the sides of our flying geese and diamond in a square units to the pinwheels that these half square triangles are going to make. So there'll be 2 pieces of fabric in those setting pieces instead of 1 like the other 4 have been. So to make these, it's real simple. I'm just going to put right sides together, stitch a 1/4 inch down, press them open, and then I'll trim to size, which the pattern specifies. So I'm going to make 48 of these half square triangles. As you can see, I have all my half square triangles trimmed, and I've laid them out so that they're going according to the pattern. You'll notice that the 2 on the right hand side have the gingham touching the top edge on the left, and then the polka dot touches the right edge. Whereas on the left hand side, we have the darker dot on the left and the gingham on the right. Same thing with the second one from the left. So this is where fabric placement is going to be important when I'm placing these squares on my flying geese rectangles and my diamond in a square squares. So you'll notice that some of these are missing. These are just the ones that are solid white that are missing, but these are the ones that I'm going to have to add pieces to. And as you can see from my little trinket dish here, the half square triangles were oversized, and so I could cut a little off of each side to get them to the size I needed. So there's no need to use a really scant seam allowance or anything. They were oversized. And I just love having the different trinket dishes to catch my scraps and loose threads and just keep my area a little tidy. They come in so many fun designs. So a little just a little side note that trinket dishes or ring dishes come in handy. So I'm going to sew the 2 pieces of the top row together, then the 2 pieces of the bottom row together. I'll press toward the dark fabric so that they'll nest when I sew the 2 rows together, and then I'll press those rows open. So that'll be the plan. And once I'm done with that, I'll talk about the placement of those square pieces to make these setting pieces. I've got my pinwheels all pressed and together. You can see I had nested the seams to sew the top and bottom row together, but then I pressed them open in the end. And this one, again, you want to pin to keep those points aligned. And watch the pattern for the orientation. The first 2 on the left should have the dark polka dot along the upper left edge. And then on the right side, the 2 right pieces, the gingham should be on the upper left edge. I did go ahead and sew these 2 piles, which were identical, all at the same time. And then I did these 2 piles separately, just so I didn't get anything mixed up. You can chain piece as much as you want, but also just keep in mind what you can keep track of. So now I'm going to focus on the flying geese. I'll do the diamond in a square pieces later, but you're going to have your 2 blue fabrics, and your flying geese are just going to match whatever's on the edge of the pinwheel, whatever it would be touching. So I'm going to lay these out like so, including the side pieces. So I just look at what's touching the edge. And I'm just going to go around like this to lay out my pieces. And there's also a diagram so you can look at it that way. Now for each strip, and I call the strips, the star unit strips here that have the 4 stars in them, you're going to need 5 of each kind. So 5 that have the dark blue dot on the left, and 5 that have the gingham on the left. If you're doing it like the cover photo and laying it out the same way, doing the same number of, stars, 3 of each star unit, you'll want a total of 15 flying geese that are oriented this way and 15 that are oriented this way, which will make up the 30 total that you'll need. So it's just, again, a matter of keeping the pieces in the right order, which is why this layout is just a slight bit more complex than the other layouts, but still very doable. So for me, I'm just not going to chain piece everything all at once. I'll chain piece like setups. That way I'll be less likely to mix things up or end up with too many of one and too few of another. So I'm just going to double check my orientations, and then I'll add 2 more to each pile for a total of 3. And I'll pull all the ones that have the dot on the left, and I'll sew those flying geese first, get them pressed and trimmed, and then I'll do the same for the gingham. So I'll end up with 15 of each orientation. Okay, my first set of flying geese are finished and placed where they need to be. These ones down at the bottom here, it can throw you off a little because they're turned upside down. So the far pieces on the right are all going to be sewn the same way. And I did accidentally stitch 2 of my squares on the wrong side, so I just swapped them out. They'll go with the right side flying geese, so I don't have as many of those to prepare. All right, all my flying geese units are in place. So now I'm going to focus on the diamond in a square units. And these ones are going to be laid out a little differently. So again, it's a matter of paying close attention to what they're going to be neighboring. So this first one, I'll put 3 of each on. And
I'm going to sew the diagonal pieces on first. So I might do, this polka dot and the diagonal across from it. So no matter how it's laid out, I'll just do diagonals, press, trim, and then sew the other diagonals on. Now this one will look different because of what's neighboring. We'll have the two polka dots together in the top row and the two gingham on the bottom. And then on this last one, it will be a gingham in the top and the corner. I'll put 3 of each. And then polka dots in the bottom. So all 3 are going to be laid out differently. These 2, really, it's just a matter of rotating because you have the opposite pieces are the same fabric. But this one I want to be real careful with when I'm sewing. So I'm going to just take and do 3 at a time. I'll grab 3 of my base squares here, and then I'll sew these using the sew and flip method with opposite sides. Okay, all my diamond and a square units are finished. So the last step is just to add these squares and rectangles, 3 to each pile, and I will chain piece like I've been doing to complete my final units. So I've just been using my small rotating cutting mat. It's kind of a design board and loading the first 2 columns that I want to sew together. So again, I'll just sew these rows together and keep adding on to it, and then eventually sew all 3 rows together. All right, my pinwheel blocks are finished. I think these ones might be my favorite ones yet. So I have 3 of these, and I'm just going to go ahead and place these along with the other star strip units I've made on the board under the flags. And I think I will save that for the next video, just the final layout and adding the setting pieces. So we'll leave it here for now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again next time.